Hey classmates, this is Lacey and I am here today to talk to you about grief. More specifically, grief that we'll see in the classroom. So what exactly is grief? Most of us think of grief as losing an actual person in our lives, but that's not necessarily the case. The Mayo Clinic defines it as a natural reaction to loss. Grief is both universal and a personal experience. Individual experiences of grief vary and are influenced by the nature of the loss. Some examples of loss include the death of a loved one, the ending of an important relationship, job loss, loss through theft, or the loss of independence through disability. So in other words, just losing a job or a breakup through a long-term relationship, that could throw you into a spin of grief. You're grieving the loss of something. Regardless of the situation that is causing grief, grief is a strong and sometimes really overwhelming emotion for people. Experts advise those grieving to realize that they can't control the process and to prepare for varying stages of grief. These things take a lot of time. Understanding why they're suffering can help, as can talking to others and trying to resolve issues that cause significant emotional pain, such as feeling guilty for a loved one's death. Unfortunately, there are no step-by-step instructions to death and bereavement and grief. None of it is linear, it's all over the place, and there are many triggers that can bother students. Mourning can last for months or years. Generally, the pain is tempered as time passes, and the bereaved adapts to life without a loved one, to the news of a terminal diagnosis, or to the realization that someone they love may die. It is important to realize that mourning can last for months or years. Generally, the pain is tempered as time passes, and as the bereaved adapt to life with their loved one, to the news of a terminal diagnosis, or to the realization that someone they love may die. A key takeaway here is that grief is not linear. There's no instruction book to how to help somebody get over loss. It's never something you get over. Time does not heal. Time just makes it a little more easy because you find acceptance in these things. Who experiences grief? Well, unfortunately, none of us are immune from catching the grief bug. Through a great organization here in Regina called Caring Hearts Camp, I've been able to work with many different students from many socioeconomic backgrounds and help them learn to cope with their grief. So what have I learned at camp? Well, I've learned a lot. I've learned that grief does not pick on anyone. There is no type of person it looks for. Anyone who exists will make a great home for grief. There's been some situations where a grandparent has passed away from a terminal disease. There's been other situations where it's been a car accident and the student who's coming to camp is the lone survivor. So as you can imagine, there's lots of guilt. There's also been crazy stories, the ones you see in the news, the murders in Regina. A lot of the kids who are affected by those are at the camp as well. The one thing I find a little bit weird about grief is that even though it's so common and so inevitable, it's really not ever talked about. Students may be reluctant to talk with their parents and caregivers about their own grief when they are worried about how their parents and caregivers are adjusting. Teachers and other school personnel often have some distance from the loss, especially when it's a family member who has died. Children may find it safer to talk to you at first. The school is a safe place. You're a little bit out of the loop, but you're still close enough that they know you care. Therefore, you become a really trusted source and often the person that a student will come to first. A death that happens within the school is a different story. There will be a lot of feelings of your own that you're trying to process, and this can make things a little bit difficult. You're grieving as well. So perhaps you've lost a student in your class, or you've lost a teacher at the school. These situations are tricky, but make sure you take advantage of situations such as social workers and school counselors who are willing to come in and lend support to staff and students alike. Always remember that it is important and completely natural to show your feelings. If a student is talking to you about the loss of a loved one or a diagnosis and they're emotional and you get emotional too, that is totally okay. That just means you are human and you're empathizing with them, and it's okay if they see you having a moment of empathy, not weakness. If a student opens up to you and you feel comfortable sharing a situation of your own, feel free to share with the student. It's not taking away from their experience, it's letting them know that there is hope and there is a future ahead of them. A major takeaway here is that you don't have to be the tough teacher all the time. You can be genuine, you can be vulnerable, you can share your stories, you can empathize. This is a great opportunity to connect with a student. They may really need somebody in this time of their lives, and just having a shoulder to cry on, a door they know is always open, will really make a difference in how they recover and get through these first few stages of grief. Grief looks different with everybody. How everybody copes is completely different. Some students are going to come back to school and come flying out of the gates getting 90s, 100s, and seem to be doing great. However, other students may feel a little bit different. They may have an inability to perform daily activities, difficult or lack of interest in schoolwork. They may feel depressed, difficulty concentrating, changes to sleep and eating patterns, a lack of interest in social activities or hanging out with their friends, deteriorating relationships with their family, substance use, self-harming behaviors, and other risk-taking, strong on the outside while denying pain inside, and thoughts about suicide. Key takeaway here, once again, grief is not linear, it's a very personal experience, and it looks different for everybody. So now that we know what grief is and what it might look like in students, what can us teachers do about it? Well, first of all, we can certainly provide learning supports. Children often have difficulty concentrating or learning while they are grieving. They may benefit from tutoring, extra support, or temporary changes in their test schedules or other classroom demands. Do not wait for problems to start before offering extra help. Understandably, time at home for these students at nighttime while they're supposed to be studying for a test might look a little different than the typical student who is not grieving. It could be a little harder to concentrate, and we don't really know what their family situation is like or how things have changed since their life has been tipped upside down. Sharing concerns in this situation with administration, the students, other teachers, and the school counselor can be a really good idea. However, be very careful about sharing this news with other students. Grieving students may need a place to escape to, and school is often that place where they can just go to school, see their friends, get back into the groove, and feel normal again. When every other student in the class knows what happened to them, it can create a really awkward shift in how things are kind of carried out in the classroom. Other students may not know what to say, or they don't want to say anything to hurt their friends' feelings, and that's all perfectly okay. But make sure you talk to the student. Perhaps they have some insight on whether they want to share or not. If they do want their classmates to know, definitely break the news, but if they don't, make sure you respect that as well. This next part is a little bit tricky. I want to tell you to make sure you connect with parents and caregivers, but the truth is that's not always what's best. The truth is, as much as we want all of our students to be coming from a great home, it's not always the reality for everybody. I've worked with students who come from really tricky backgrounds, which make a communication line to the home virtually non-existent. And to be honest, communication to the home would make things a little more problematic for the grieving student. So with that being said, if you can communicate with a caregiver or a parent at home with the student, that would be great, but keep in mind that that's not always the case for everybody. Depending on the age of your student, it might not be cool for them to go to speak to a counselor. So maybe having scheduled times for them to go speak to the school counselor would be a great option. For example, say Monday, Wednesday, Fridays from 1 to 1:30, they leave your class for a few minutes to go talk to the school counselor and just have that time. No one needs to know about it. It can just be a scheduled time. If they don't want to go, they can stay in the class, but they don't have to worry about reaching out for those types of supports. Even if you've worked with students before many times, even if you can empathize, even if you've been down the exact same road, make sure this is a time that you put aside to listen and to not talk. Students need to be heard sometimes, listened to, and not spoken to. Try to avoid criticizing your students. They may appear selfish and immature after personal loss, and they tend to be concerned with things that affect them personally. As they struggle to deal with personal loss, children may appear more self-centered and immature than usual. It's important to stay patient with them and just to remind them that you're there for them and avoid criticizing their behaviors, if possible. Especially if these behaviors are out of the ordinary, that just shows us that they are stressed and grieving and they're showing their emotions through a different outlet. Allowing extra time for assignments and extra time on exams is extremely helpful for grieving students. Like I said before, grieving is not linear and it can poke its little ugly head out at any time, really affecting a student's ability to concentrate and study for exams and assignments. Depending on the age of the grieving student, they may want to keep a physical reminder of their loved one. This might mean a photo in their desk, or perhaps they want to keep something a little more special in your desk as a teacher. This is completely normal and actually could be encouraged depending on the student. As educators, it's very important to do the right thing and to help our students. However, it's just as important to not do the wrong things. First things first is know that you are going to make mistakes, and that's okay. Just do your best. Next, Remember that the goal is not to take away the pain of grief, but to allow an opportunity for children to express it. Avoid comments trying to cheer them up like, "Oh, at least they died a hero," or "At least you got to go to Disneyland last September." It's very common for students to want to share their personal experiences, and it's very common for students to not want to share their personal experiences. Either way, it's important to make sure you are listening and not talking. Make sure to give them space to express themselves. Children often feel really guilty after death has occurred. Children of all ages, as well as adults, often wonder what they did, didn't do, or should have done that would have prevented the death. And this will happen when there is absolutely no logical reason to feel this way. It is very common for students to feel guilt for surviving the accident that a sibling or a peer did not, or for having fun again, or for not always feeling sad about missing their loved one. Just reassure them that they are not responsible for the death and that they are allowed to be happy too. As grief changes and develops, so does the learning skills of the bereaved. Students grieve in stages and over many years. At each new stage in their lives, such as when they graduate from high school, get married, have their own kids, or reach the age when a parent died, they will have new skills in thinking and relating to others. Before I let you go, there's a few things I want to talk about, and that comes in the form of trigger warnings. It is extremely important to be sensitive to the materials that you're using to teach when you are dealing with children going through loss and bereavement. For example, you have a grieving student in your class. Maybe switch your novel study from A Fault in Our Stars to something a little more uplifting. Be very mindful about any books you're reading in class or any videos you show, as a lot of books and a lot of movies have a lot of death in them. Also, enough with the Mother's Day crafts and the Father's Day crafts. As somebody who lost a mom at a young age, it was the worst going to school on Mother's Day, and everyone's making these little cute macaroni crafts for their moms, and I just felt like garbage. Now, I don't mean to take the fun out of all the cutesy little things you can do with your elementary students, but perhaps it's an optional assignment, or perhaps it's a craft they could stay in at recess to work on or at lunch hour, so you don't have to force those grieving students to sit there and watch. Or be very careful with your language. Maybe it's not necessarily Mother's Day or Father's Day, but Caretaker's Day. And by caretaker, I mean caregiver. But don't forget to appreciate your caretakers too. Although I can't make any guarantees, nor would I want to, but the chances are very high that you will deal with a grieving student in your classroom sometime in your career. 7 in 10 teachers currently have at least one student in their class who have lost a parent, a guardian, a sibling, or a close friend in the past year alone. So what do we learn about grief? Well, none of us are immune to it, and we will definitely see it in our classrooms. We also know now that grief is not linear. Grief will be all over the place. It'll come, it'll sneak up on you when you least expect it. We also know that grieving students need a little more time, a little more understanding, and someone to talk to. And they also need just a sense of normalcy. So make sure you treat them like a human, treat them as usual, but just remember to be a little extra kind and empathetic, especially when it comes to tests and exams, and just being a shoulder to cry on. We can't change our students' experience, but what we can do is change the experience for our students.